Serious, what is the creepiest or most unexplained thing that's happened to you that you still think and / or wonder about to this day? About 1973 I went to work. Got out of the car. Walked to the entrance and on the way saluted Warrant Officer Farty because he was in uniform. He had always worn civilian clothes. He waved me on and said he'd be in a minute. I got to my office and expected to be the first one there because I always got there first as the lowest ranking guy in the office and had to make the coffee. I was surprised that the chief, a captain, and his senior sergeant were already in the office. The captain asked me to sit down at my desk. I thought I was in trouble. He said he had some bad news. Warrant Officer Farty was killed in a head-on collision at 3 a.m. that morning. I protested that I had just seen him outside in the parking lot. The captain said he and the sergeant had identified the body just an hour earlier. What I'm about to write does have explanation, but it still freaked me out. At the office around 1998 to 99. The usual folks were coming and going. I chatted with one guy in the kitchen. Just a good morning and how are you? He seemed cheerful and went on his way. Later that day, somebody mentioned him and that he wasn't in work at the time. I said he is here. I spoke to him this morning. It was explained to me that his wife had died in a car accident the previous night and he was in shock. Hence turning up for work that day like nothing was happening. When I had spoken with him, there was literally no sign of the fresh horror that must have been playing out behind the facade. Chilling. 1988. We were renting a refurbished house that was part log cabin from the 1700s. Was on the john in the bathroom when I heard 3 very loud knocks on the wall beneath the bathroom window. Looked out the window, nada. 30 seconds later it happened again. And again nothing outside. Later, wife and I decide to plant some stuff beneath the bathroom window outside. And 4 inches down we hit a concrete slab. Turns out the bathroom used to be entranceway to the log house. Spooky as hell. The exact same thing happened to me. I live in a bungalow. And in my room there was a window. I was sitting by my desk by the window one night, when I heard 3 distinct knocks. I got my dog and my dad and we looked outside. My dad said I was likely just being paranoid. I go back to sit by my desk and I hear 3 knocks again and again. There is a tall fence surrounding my house with no entrance but a gate which you need a code to use. So to this day I still have no idea what the 3 repeated knocks were. My family has tons of weird paranormal stuff, but the one I actively think about had nothing to do with ghosts or anything. My best friend vanished in like 4th or 5th grade. Her whole family just up and left without warning. Got a phone call from her months later saying she missed me and she was safe but wasn't allowed to give any details. Someone came in the room and she had to hang up. To this day I have no freaking clue what happened. Every now and then I try to find her on social media. No luck. Yet. I was driving at night after a football game as a high school student. My younger sister was in the passenger seat and my friend was in the middle back seat, leaning forward to chat with us easier. We were dropping my friend off before heading home, and driving down a pretty dark road to get there. We lived in a rural area, so no street lights. Suddenly, my sister and friend both gasp and I step on the brakes, thinking they must have seen a deer or something. They're both in shock, asking me if I just saw that old man who flashed up in the middle of the road and then disappeared. I hadn't seen anything but I was terrified. They were both so shocked and had the exact same reaction. My friend didn't even want to get out at his house once we got there, he was so scared. I hope this gets read by a robot on YouTube. I live in a beach town and one of my friends had just got back to her parents' house for the summer. So I went over to hang out for a little while. Since it wasn't late when I went to go home, I figured I'd take the long way home to drive along the bay for the view of the stars and the lights of the ships waiting to go up the river. When I got to the road that runs along the bay, I realized I wasn't going to see anything because heavy fog had rolled in, which is super common in the spring. This road is a 25 miles per hour road with the beach and trails over the dunes on the left, and houses on the right. I was driving along the road with pretty bad visibility with how foggy and dark it was. All of a sudden from my left I see a figure coming up the dune and towards the road. I slammed on my brakes hard enough to skid a little because I thought it was someone coming off the beach to go to a house across the road. It had the shape of a woman in a long dress, but I couldn't see any facial features. When it got to the middle of the road, the figure, it just floated up at an angle and disappeared. There wasn't a beach access trail where I saw it, and I can't figure an logical explanation for the way it hovered and took off. I was stopped and watched it until it disappeared, trying to figure it out. It freaked me out pretty bad, honestly. And even 5 to 6 years later I still can picture the way it moved like it was yesterday. Nah man. That sounds like La Llorona. Scary stuff. Worked as a night auditor at an old hotel. It was around 2 a.m. and I get a phone call from the pool room, which is supposed to be closed. I pick up the phone and answer, and all I hear is very heavy breathing. I hang up the phone and check the cameras, and all the lights are on in the pool room. So I go down the hallway to kick whoever it is out. But as I get close to the glass door, it is so cold I can see my breath. The door is completely fogged over and all the lights are out. I open the door and the light above me comes on because they are motion sensor lights. I am looking around but I don't see anything. Then the light comes on across the pool from me, but nothing is there. Then every light in a path begins to light up around one side of the pool as if something is walking towards me. I ran out of there so fast and locked myself in my manager's office and stayed until sunrise. But the worst was yet to come. I had played it off in my head as bugs causing the motion sensor lights to go off. I was telling my manager about my experience so he would get a good laugh. When I told him about the phone call from the pool, he didn't laugh at all. He asked me if I was 100% positive the caller I'd said the pool room. And I said yeah. Then he told me there hasn't been a phone in the pool room for 30 years. I told him there was no way because that would be physically impossible. He told me to go look for myself. I looked and there was no phone. Complete and total mindbeep because I didn't believe in the supernatural at all before that. But to this day, no matter how many ways I try to rationalize it, I just can't. It is completely unexplainable. Stayed over at a friend's house. In the middle of the night I woke up to what sounded like someone walking in the attic above us. Thought nothing more of it and went back to sleep. Wake up and on his ceiling were footprints in a perfect circle around his light bulb as if someone was walking upside down around the light. Showed it to him and he just shrugged and said he thought his house was haunted. But it didn't bother him. That was 30 years ago and I still remember it like it was yesterday. One night the door to my room started creaking open. Like a half inch at a time. If I would look right at the door it would stop. But when I'd look at the book I was reading and back up it would be just a bit more open. Finally it was almost wide enough for someone to walk through. So I said stop it in as commanding a voice as I could muster. And it stopped mid-creak. 160-year-old house. Everything creaked. I was almost too scared to go to sleep that night. I know for a fact that no one in my family was home that night. Another thing was a constant occurrence of my childhood. I grew up on a fairly isolated farm, with a wood that came up to the barn on one side and acres of fields between us and any neighbor. Every night when I'd finished chores, shut off the barn light and close the door. The only light would be from a dim porch light about 40 yards from the barn. And it wasn't too overcast or foggy. The moon and stars. Anyway, Every night I'd feel something staring at me from around the corner of the barn. I somehow knew it had red eyes. And was about 10 feet off the ground. I could feel evil coming from it. And I'd always run to the house as fast as I could. Certain it was right behind me. I didn't know what it was. And as terrified as I was, I never told anyone about it. Because my parents had a habit of dismissing stuff like that. And even as a kid I didn't want to be seen as a sissy crybaby. Which is definitely what my dad would have called me. With time I kinda got over it. And figured it was an overactive imagination combined with too many goosebump stories that caused it. That is. Until about 8 years later. When I'm sitting around swapping spooky stories with my friend. Who basically grew up on the farm. She said that as soon as the lights were off in the barn, she felt something scary and evil staring at her same corner of the barn. I asked a few questions. And yes, she felt it was about 10 feet off the ground. And even though she never actually saw whatever it was, she was sure it had red eyes. I was freaking out. And it got worse when I asked my siblings if they had ever been scared by anything near the barn. I was careful not to ask leading questions. And every single one of them said the same thing. There was a scary thing that would stare from the corner of the barn when they'd turn off the light. I know it was just a feeling that we all grew out. How likely is it that we all felt the same thing from the same place?